Well, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Thank you for being here. My name is Kim Porter. I'm the Executive Director of Be a Part of the Conversation. We are celebrating 10 years of bringing programs like this to communities in the 5-county area. Really glad to have you with us. I wish we could ask for a show of hands if you've been to one of our events before. I'm thinking that maybe with tonight's guests, we might have some newcomers. Welcome if this is your first time. I want to thank our community partner, Montgomery County Office of Drug and Alcohol. They were very excited to have Congresswoman Dean with us, along with her son, Harry Cunnane. So thank you very much to them for supporting our programs, many programs of ours that they are behind over these past several years. So thank you. I'd like to introduce you to our program director, Judy Hirsch.
Hi, nice to see everyone.
As well as our communications manager, Kara Schwartz.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
So Kara and Judy and I will be keeping an eye on the questions that are coming in. I want to let you know that we are going to be recording this program. Thank you very much to Madeleine and Harry for allowing that. Actually, I got Madeleine's permission, Harry. I hope you're cool too. So we are going to be posting this, give it a little time to process this evening. If I have to do any editing in case there's something that a question comes up that might have been, very personal or something like that, we might edit something out. But we will post it on our follow-up page, conversation.zone/Modco. Sorry, my allergy throat. Judy's going to be sharing some links in the chat box this evening, and this is one of them. This is where you'll find that recording later on that follow-up page. And please take our survey that comes up at the end of the program. It should pop up automatically when the program ends. It just gives you an opportunity to let us know if this was helpful to you or not, as well as any kinds of other topics you'd like us to talk about in the future. We'd love to hear from you. We really do take a look at those to see what you are looking for. I want to let you know about a few programs that are coming up. You'll see some links on these pages, but don't worry, Judy's going to share our calendar link with you in the chat. You can find all of these listed on our calendar. Tomorrow evening, actually, we have a program called Parenting on Your Feet. We're going to be talking about some warning signs of substance use. That's through our mock teen bedroom that we'll be showing. And but in addition to seeing some of those warning signs, we're also going to give you a lot of support about what to do when these signs come up. And we're going to be hosted by the Hatboro-Horsham School District, which is where we started out 10 years ago. And we'll be joined by the high school principal, Dennis Williams, as well as Jill Adams, who is an adolescent treatment provider. So we'll be talking with the two of them about some really helpful things, I think, for parents who might be experiencing some of these things. This Thursday, this is actually hosted by the COATESVILLE Youth Initiative, but we're partnering with them and Compass Mark in Chester County to talk about prevention and intervention as well. And next week, is that next week? Good heavens. We have the Trouble with Alcohol in Kids. This is a program, again, through Montgomery County Office of Drug and Alcohol, in addition to the DA's office and Family Services. This was a program we just did last week, but we're repeating it in case anyone would like to join us again and wasn't able to attend last Thursday. This is a very important topic. Alcohol still is the #1 substance misused by young people. So very important that we talk about, again, not only the signs, but how to address it. And we're repeating this program with Montgomery County on Thursday, May 20th. And finally, I want to let you know that on June 3rd, we have one of our rock star clinicians, Rick Shugart, will be with us. Rick is a marriage and family therapist, and he's going to be talking about the keys to family recovery. So this is for family members like me, like Madeleine Dean, who have identified that someone in their family has a substance use disorder. How can we recover? We want the best for our loved one, but we have a lot that we can do to get healthy and work on those relationships that might have been, really gone through a lot of challenges. So again, there's that link on our calendar that Judy's sharing with you, where you can find all of these programs. And we're going to have more coming up soon that we haven't posted yet as well. I always like to suggest that if you are a parent in particular who has, again, dealt with someone, a son or daughter who has a substance use disorder, we need each other. We really need to connect. There, of course, are Al-Anon and Nar-Anon meetings, and we strongly recommend those as well. Those are 12-step programs. These groups are a little different. They're specifically for parents, and we have crosstalk. If you're a 12-stepper, you know what I'm talking about, because we really need to kind of share our experience and interact. These meetings take place throughout the week, throughout the region, but on this page, you'll find links to lots of meetings that are taking place all the time. Many of them are on Zoom right now. 1 or 2 are in person right now. So keep an eye on that. We'll update that as things change going forward. So I am just so excited about our guests this evening. Here is the book, Under Our Roof, A Son's Battle for Recovery, A Mother's Battle for Her Son. And we are so happy to have with us Madeleine Dean, the representative from the United States, the 4th District of Pennsylvania in the United States Congress. She is the author of Under Our Roof, as is her son, Harry Cunnane, who is now the Regional Vice President of Care and Treatment Center. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to give a little bio on each of these guys. I'm sure that most of you know who we have with us, but Madeleine Dean is the Congresswoman for the 4th District of Pennsylvania. She's a member of the House Judiciary and House Financial Services Committees. She's the Vice Chair of the Bipartisan Women's Caucus. From 2012 to 2018, she served in the Pennsylvania House. From 2001 to 2011, she taught writing at LaSalle University, and she's contributed to Newsweek, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Philadelphia Daily News, and other regional publications. She and her husband, PJ Cunnane, live in Jenkintown, Pennsylvania, and they have 3 sons, 2 daughters-in-law, and 3 grandchildren. And I think I heard you have a 4th on the way?
Yes, in June.
Yay! Oh, how exciting. And Harry Cunnane has been an active member of the addiction recovery community since his recovery began more than 7 years ago, participating in a 12-step program and volunteering at rehabs and jails around Philadelphia to spread a message of hope. He now works as a resource director for the same treatment center where he originally sought help for his own addiction. He lives in Audubon, New Jersey with his wife, Juliet, his daughter, Aubrey, and his son, Sawyer.
And the baby on the way.
And the baby on the is it you're the one with the baby on the way?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
How exciting. Wow. Oh, well, I'm so grateful to have you guys here. And I should say in full disclosure that I have known this family for, I think it's 30 years because we moved to Glenside 32 years ago. And that's when I met you. We were neighbors. And I definitely remember Madeleine. I don't know if I remember Harry. You were just a little guy. Were you even born then 30 years ago? I don't know.
Just.
Yeah. My son's 32. I think you guys are pretty close in age. So I'm just so grateful to both of you for being here. And now we get to work with Harry. We used to see you. Now, hopefully we will again post-COVID, but we'd see you at events. And also, in full disclosure, my son is also an alum of Care and Treatment Center, and I serve on their advisory board. So I get to see Harry once in a while in a meeting too. So that's really special. And I wanted to start by asking you guys, maybe Madeleine, if you could start, if you don't mind, just to talk about the publishing of this book, which came out in February. It was early February, I believe. Right. It was a pretty tumultuous time for you in particular, Mad. And I know there's a lot going on, and you've spent all this time since its release going around talking about it. I know you've done so many of these interviews and Q&As. But if each of you can just talk a little bit about what your expectations were, what your hopes were in publishing this book, which if you haven't read it, please check it out. It's written in such an amazing way. It goes through their timeline. I have lots of notes in here, but it's written from both of their perspectives, and it alternates fonts so that you can easily identify the 2 voices. But if you could talk about what your hopes were for it and what the past several months have been like for you.
Well, first, Kim, a big thank you to you. It's so nice to see you. It's been way too long, but thank you for allowing us to be a part of the conversation. And thanks forever for the work that you have been doing and you continue to do with such passion and heart and intellect. And Judy and Kara, great to be with you. We started this book. I was running for Congress. I was not yet in Congress. We were asked to write the book or some the proposal came to us. Maybe you guys would like to write a book. So we literally started it before I was elected to Congress. It was the summer that I was running. And we finished the manuscript, I guess it was about 18 months in, if I'm right, Harry. And we had picked the release date of February the 16th of this year, a year ago, thinking that would be a sensible time. Well, not knowing the tumult that we would all be going through as a country and in my own work. But we had one goal in mind, Kim. When we were asked, would you want to write a book or tell your story? We had one goal in mind, which was, if we could help somebody, if we could help another family, if they could see themselves in me, or they could see themselves in Harry, most importantly in Harry, and get the offer of hope and what it takes, and how a family can get through these extraordinarily difficult times and heal, as you suggested, then it's worth the work. And so that was our entire goal. Let's see if we can't help somebody. And it's been joyful. Some of it has been really joyful to hear families reach out to us and say, thank you. I see myself in what you did, Mad, the things that you kept stumbling through. Or I see my son in Harry. I see my daughter in Harry. Or it gives me hope for a child who is not yet in recovery. So for us, it was a labor of love and of pain, but mostly just the idea that maybe we could help somebody else.
Great. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Harry.
All right. And first, just thank you, Kim, Judy, and Kara for having us tonight. We're so excited to be here and grateful to the work that each of you do with being part of the conversation. Like my mom said, I mean, really our goal was to try to help somebody. And, I don't know maybe why, but, we spent so much time really focused on the writing and just trying to get to the release date. I almost had blocked out what happens after, because you're writing and rewriting and revising so much with that goal in mind of, hopefully someone can get something from this, and whether that's hope or understanding or connection, whatever that may be. And I'll say, for me, it's been incredibly rewarding to have people reach out afterwards, because, we wrote the book in a very honest and vulnerable way, where I've had a lot of people reach out, whether they have a connection to, addiction or recovery or not, and just recognize that vulnerability and have opened up about other struggles that they've had. It doesn't matter what it was. I recently had a neighbor come talk to me, and it wasn't at all related, but, he felt comfortable because he felt like he got to know me a little bit through my writing. And that's just been such an amazing feeling. But the other part of it was, releasing a book. One, we had never written a book before. And two, releasing a book in COVID. I don't know what anybody expected. And to do it on February 16th after such a just chaotic time in the media cycle. So I will say I was really grateful to see, how many opportunities we had to talk about the book in the media when there's so much going on, from the political landscape to COVID to everything else that's happening in our country. It just shows how important this issue is. And I think, we're starting to see, sadly, just how many people are really struggling even more so throughout this pandemic. I mean, the numbers are horrifying. And, I'll just say that's one other piece as to why I wanted to write this book, and to write a book about recovery is so much of what we see on the news and in the media about substance use disorder and about addiction is the horror stories. We wanted to show a story of hope and a story of recovery that's a pretty common story, to show that it's possible and to remind people that, if you're caught up in this, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And you should always hold on to whatever hope that you have.
Wonderful. Thank you. You're so right. I think, Harry, about what this pandemic has done to our people, our population out there. And I have said this before, I think that the isolation has kind of ripped the cover off of this in a lot of families, because it's almost like there's more exposure within the family unit now. If you're isolated at home, and maybe a positive has been, I can think of a couple of parents who've said that the other parent was maybe still in some denial, and now they're working from home and they have more of a front row seat for it. And they're like, okay, I got it. It's real. It's not going away. So it's interesting how maybe it's raised the bottom a little bit. We can hope, I guess, maybe that's a positive that comes from it. But yeah, connection is everything. And it's a struggle. I think people are getting a little more comfortable with this kind of format, but I think everybody's looking forward to those, even parking lot meetings. I know those are popping up a lot more in the warmer days ahead. So thank you for that. And I want to remind everyone, please go ahead and submit questions into the chat box or into the Q&A. I'm going to start with some questions that I have and ask these two to do a little bit of reading for us. But please go ahead and submit those, and Kara and Judy will keep an eye as well. So I have pre-assigned you guys some reading. So Madeleine, if you wouldn't mind starting us out, I would really appreciate that.
Well, Kim, I'm happy to do it. This is from page 124 in the book, and it happens to be the weekend that PJ and I, my husband and I, figured out what was going wrong, what was going on. I had suspected it for a long time, but this was going to be the weekend that we would confront Harry. Or right after this weekend, I should say. And so this segment that you asked me to read, as I look back now, I realized that we were also in the throes of Superstorm Sandy. I have almost no memory of the hurricane, though. I was focused on the storm inside our house. Over the course of the weekend, I gathered bank statements and lined up some things. For the first time I could remember, PJ and I were seeing Harry's situation through the same lens. There were no I told you so's from me. And PJ no longer needed convincing. The bank statements were clear. We talked for hours about our fears, about our plan for confronting Harry. Would we need an interventionist? And what was the best course of treatment? In the past, both of us had been through attempted interventions with family members who were struggling, but it felt different now that it was our son. There is something uniquely desperate about a son stealing from parents who are willing to give him everything. Sorry about this. Eventually, we came up with a plan. We would get through the weekend with the storm outside and our granddaughter's first birthday. After that, PJ and I would confront Harry with the bank statements and the truth. And then, God willing, he would agree to go for help.
Thank you very much. I know that that's an especially tough one, but I know that it's something that so many parents like you and Judy and me have faced, that moment of truth. And I really appreciate you revisiting that. And obviously we know that things worked out very beautifully for Harry, but you ended up doing this pretty much on your own. Can you talk about kind of the whole, your family, and for folks who've read the book, they get the picture. You have a large, but very, very close family. And you had some family members who had, a history with not only the treatment center they went to, but also just understanding this disease. Can you talk about the support you had around you and what kinds of things helped you in that period? Where were you able to reach out for those lifelines and things from family and friends,
Well, Kim, you were number one.
I wasn't setting that up. I swear to God, I really wasn't.
No, I know you weren't.
Your family, and stuff. But
I know you weren't. But I was struggling because I was battling in the house. I would, if you've read it, you can see I attempted drug testing Harry multiple times. He and I were battling terribly. It was just a sad, very sad tone in our house because I felt that he was lying. I saw he was slipping away. I saw his affect change, his health change, his look change, his attitude towards life disappear. And I was struggling to figure out what it was, and battling with Harry. We were just like locked horns over and over again. And my husband was very cognizant of what was going on, but really wanted to trust more and wanted to see if Harry couldn't work his way through whatever the heck he was going through. So we approached it very differently. I would be the classic bad cop, I guess. And so I was struggling for answers. And so truly, I think you're right. Our family experience, having had family members generationally have struggles with alcohol, with addiction, with other substance use disorders, I thought informed me. And as I look back now, I realize how little I did understand. But truly, Kim, this is not, it's not false. It's true. It was our dear friend, Jackie. I kept telling Jackie, I'm so worried about Harry. And she said, you might want to talk to Kim. And you remember the longest coffee we ever had? It was about 3 hours. We sat in that coffee shop. And it was you who helped me. You opened my eyes. You took me out of some of my own denial. And so some of that I remember very much when I wrote this, thinking of you, because you said, there are professionals who could help you at this moment. If you get to this moment. When I met with you, it was pre really understanding what was going wrong. So I say all of that to say, yes, family was supportive very quickly when we identified what was wrong. But I say this to anybody who's out there, it is the random connection of one person saying, maybe you want to speak to this person. And Kim, you unlocked a lot in my own mind about what I didn't see, what I was missing, and how to prepare myself and do my homework and prepare, to look at Karen or to look at other places. It was literally you who talked to me about Little Creek. So it's not false praise. It's what you just said in the beginning, which is it's about connecting. By connecting to literally a friend, connecting me to you, my neighbor, it made a world of difference.
Well, and I think you've done such an amazing thing by even being so transparent in this for both of you, that this takes so much courage. And I mean, Harry, this particularly takes a lot, and my son as well is very public about his, as is Judy's son. And, it helps so many people to have that transparency. So I just think that by publishing this and you being such a public figure, Matt, that you're opening the door for so many people to ask for help. Because I think that's you even had the gumption to ask Jackie, or to tell Jackie what was going on. I mean, so many people, this is shrouded, this is isolated. And I always remember my friend Pam, who talks about this, that when her son, when one of her kids first became, it was clear that he was addicted and there were problems were rising and the neighbors kind of got wind of it for one reason or another, she would actually be in the grocery store, see somebody at the opposite end of the aisle, they would make eye contact and they'd whip their cart around and go the other way, like she was a pariah. And I hear that kind of story and it just absolutely breaks my heart. Yeah. I hear parents say, like, my kids aren't allowed to play with these other kids because the older sibling, has had a police car in the driveway, whatever. This is just, it is so unfortunate that the outcomes for this disorder happen to be criminal. And it is a public health crisis, but it can become, a law enforcement issue. And that certainly doesn't help us with stigma. So I think that you have done so much to erase stigma. So anyway, thank you so much for your transparency. And I want to jump ahead to Harry, the portion that we talked about you reading, because this is now on the other side of your treatment. And I just think this is such an interesting moment for you, and I appreciate you sharing this as well.
For sure. So just to preface it a little bit, so this is after, I went into treatment with no idea what to expect. I thought it was going to be, 28 or 30 days and I'm home, and, it was this one thing. And I found out when I was there that was not the case. And I was fortunate that I was able to, I say fortunate now in hindsight. At the time, I was not happy when I realized I needed more time. I wasn't able to come home yet. So I was in a structured sober living house. And from the moment I got there, I was sort of plotting on, the first home pass, the first time I could go back home, and how excited I was for it. So this is from page 166 of the book. Before coming home on Christmas Eve, I secretly hoped that I would convince my mom and dad to let me stay for good. But something happened when I actually got there, something I hadn't expected. I quickly realized that I felt more comfortable in rehab than I did in my own house. Being home was like torture. There were some positives, of course, like seeing my family and especially my daughter. But as I looked around the house, all I remembered was the pain I'd felt when I last lived there. Every surface in every bathroom had once been a place where I snorted lines. I had been so creative. Every hard, flat surface was fair game for crushing pills. I felt tempted to run my finger along the top of the toilet tank, checking for blue or white residue. The drugs had given me the ability to deal with life. Without them, I wasn't sure how to cope. At Little Creek, I was making progress with the routine, waking up on time for morning group, always sure to save enough time for a cigarette, making my bed, doing the dishes, going to meetings, and most important, not doing drugs. Now I was back home for 2 days, navigating my roles as a brother, son, father, and boyfriend. All of them loaded with expectations I imagined I had to tiptoe around. It didn't make me want to use drugs, but it made me want to run away, back to the safety of treatment, away from expectations. The irony almost made me laugh. At Karen, I had been desperate to leave treatment after 28 days. Now, 2 months in, I was terrified to come home.
So that's a tough thing for a parent to hear, right? That home is a challenging place to be. So Mad, what is that like for you to recall that moment for Harry? And how was it for you?
I was terrified to have him home. At that stage, I remember when he was in Karen, and I knew going in part because of our conversations and the work we had done, that 28 days, 32 days was never going to be enough. And I remember Harry pushing back. He was maybe 2 weeks in, and he got wind of aftercare. And I desperately wanted him to go to aftercare. I thought it was the only chance, that he needed longer term treatment in order to recover. And so I was so excited to have him home for Christmas, and also scared to death that maybe this will go completely sideways and he won't go back to treatment. That was my big fear, that he'll come home and he will do that. He'll try to convince us, I'm good, we've got this. So that was my big fear, that he wouldn't finish the program at Little Creek. But I have to admit to you, until we wrote this and I read Harry's side, I didn't realize he did not say that to me. He didn't say that every surface here reminds me of my drug use. That I had no idea of that. That was the darkness that I was in.
Right. It is. I think it's such a tough thing to acknowledge. I mean, when I think about the first time our son came back home was after, we had a professional intervention. So that was his last scene in the house, and then off to treatment. And then you do all this really intense work, and our loved ones have to make these changes that are they take a Herculean effort. This is changing the way you cope, the way you function, the way you get up in the morning. Everything is different. And then you come back home. How do you not slide? How do you not stay on track and keep that focus of your recovery? And I always love to remind family members, especially, we do love them more than anyone, but we're probably just about the last people on the list they should be within their early recovery. They truly need others who walk the path with them. I don't know if you guys have any other thoughts about that, but I just really strongly believe that opportunity to be in in a sober living environment, especially like a recovery house where there are boundaries, and they have much better boundaries, those house managers, than our moms and dads do, right? And there's accountability, and you're making connections with other people who are walking the same path.
Well, those simple disciplines that I was not able to instill as a parent. You know, he read about making his bed, doing the dishes, getting up on time, just those simple disciplines that in the dysfunction of our final years of fighting, I was never going to win those battles or be able to instill those things. And so, no, we were fortunate for the length of time that Harry was able to stay, was willing to stay, but it was ironic. We didn't realize at the time, but we were both excited to see each other, and oh my gosh, this can't last long.
Yeah, and I think it's important just to, note in that, for anybody who's experienced that or is, has someone in treatment and that moment might be coming, for the 6 weeks or 8 weeks that I had been away, every time I called my mom and dad, I was telling them I'm ready to come back, and I believed that up until the moment that I got there, and just the inability to sort of prepare for that or experience that is what I think, kind of blindsided me, and that opened my eyes when I got back, that because my counselors, the therapists, they had all been telling me it's going to be harder than you're telling yourself it is. But it wasn't until that, and that's where, we can be, in early recovery and people who, I'll speak for myself, I was very hard-headed, and a lot of times I needed to bang my head against the wall. I see my mom nodding pretty heavily there. But that's, for me, it was an opportunity to learn and realize that, what, I'm not invincible, because it was my first time in treatment. I had never dealt with that. I had never been home and not high. And just the expectations, I think, is the hardest part, to go from someone who's completely consumed in substance use to trying to be almost this perfect son, because I know I'm under a microscope, because I know my mom is terrified, so that everything I do is being watched. And I just remember little things, like I would feel like I was in the bathroom for too long, and is she worried I'm using, or anything that's going on, if I'm not visible, it was just those expectations that were eating me up when I was home.
Right. And I'll bet she probably was worried when you were in the bathroom for a while, or
Oh yeah. You wandered out back, and how long's he out back? Why is he out back?
Right. Yeah, it's true. It's a tough reality to face. Mad, you talked at the beginning about when someone had pointed at Harry smoking on the front stoop and said, "Mad, he looks lousy. Charlotte's worried it's drugs." And then you were offended. And you said it hurt to know that Sean and Charlotte were thinking it too. And then you thought, "Oh my God, they think my kid's a drug addict." And you said, "Looking back, I'm sad about that reaction. Why did the truth offend me? Did I think we were too good for it?" And then later in the chapter War Stories on 151, you said, it was like when you had that acceptance and that realization, and you said, "My son is an addict. Harry is an addict." That was hard to say, hard to swallow, but it was the truth. And the truth was the most important thing for me now. For now, I would claim the truth, Harry is an addict, while searching for a more perfect word. You talked a lot about stigma in the book and what that does in the word addict, but I think this is really about acceptance, and that's certainly crucial for Harry to accept, that this is something that you're going to have to make some big life changes to deal with. But can you talk about, you guys each talk about that perception, the stigma that comes with it, and acceptance, and how that helps with both of your recoveries?
You want to go first, Harry?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, in terms of the 12 steps, acceptance is number one. And I know for me, in order to gain any sort of acceptance, I had to just understand what it meant, because I had a very skewed perception of what I thought an addict was, and I was addicted to opiates, but there were certain things I didn't do, and the threshold kept moving, right? Of as soon as I did something that was bad, all of a sudden I had to be worse in order to be an addict. And I just had this, it sounds cliche, but sort of the image of, the guy under the bridge. And if that wasn't me yet, then I wasn't an addict. And I'm sure if I was there would be some other step that had to happen for me to be, an addict. And that was a big part of it, was understanding the disease concept. Because I think the stigma for me was rooted in the shame of not understanding this as a disease and looking at it as a moral failing. And I'm just a bad person. I know what's right and wrong, and I'm incapable of consistently making the right decision, because that's how I felt. And it wasn't until after I was in treatment for a little bit of time that I recognized that, somebody told me at Karen, Father Bill said, "You're not a bad person trying to be good. You're a sick person trying to get well." And that little, phrase that he probably said to everybody, who gave him 30 seconds to say it, just opened my eyes, because there were times when I was struggling and I knew I had a problem, but the shame was overwhelming and I was unwilling to ask for help. Because I thought that would then put that shame that I felt onto my family. They would then feel that same shame that I was feeling if they knew what was happening. So I think the acceptance came from understanding what this is. And a big part of that was understanding that there's hope, right? That, it's not curable, but it's treatable. And recovery is possible, because without those pieces, it'd be a lot harder to accept that I was just helpless. So once I understand that sequence, there was just this little glimmer of hope. It wasn't overwhelming because I still didn't feel it yet, but I thought maybe, just maybe, this is worth trying and putting everything I have into, because I know where I'm coming from and I don't want to go back there.
I think for me, Kim, that part that you read, it reveals sort of my ignorance, but also kind of a dual role that maybe a parent plays. I was drug testing him. I was fighting with him. I believed he was abusing drugs. I believed he was probably addicted, but I have to admit, I don't think I ever thought to say the phrase, "Harry's an addict." That is an extraordinarily harsh descriptor. And I hope someday we'll come up with something better. But I worried and I believed it. But to have that possibility reflected in our next door neighbor, the Flynn's, who are just our dear, dear friends, and Charlotte, his classmate, dear, dear friends, they knew I was worried. They knew I was in a panic. But to have him say it, just, I don't know what that means, Kim. Maybe from your experience, you get it. But it showed a layer of denial. Inside, I believed Harry had this problem. But to have the outside world see it, especially someone as close as our dear friend see it, it pulled me up and just scared the living daylights out of me and hurt me, personally hurt me. And of course they meant it out of love, and they were spot on.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. It's a tough word. And I think, well, we have language now that is, a person with a substance use disorder, which is a bit more of a mouthful, but I think it's that person first language that is helpful. But I wish that instead of demonizing the word addiction, I wish people could understand what addiction is, because a substance use disorder is accurate, but we can also become addicted to gambling and technology and sex and love and relationships and shopping and all sorts of things. So, rather than trying to dance around the word addiction, I really think trying to educate people, obviously this is what I do for a living now, is trying to educate people about this, that an addiction is a real thing. There are degrees of it, and people throw it around like, oh, I have an addiction to whatever. And maybe they do, but maybe it's something that is manageable, and for others, not as manageable. So yeah, Judy, go ahead, please jump in.
I remember similarly when someone first told me that my son was a drug addict, and I was just in shock. But I think a lot of it is that we didn't have any understanding of what an addict was. I mean, we thought, just like Harry thought, he's the guy under the bridge. We didn't understand. I think once we understood and learned about the disease and understood that it's not that indifferent than somebody that has diabetes or
Right.
somebody that has a treatable disease, they live with it their whole life. I think then that word doesn't have that same shocking feeling. I mean, that's how I felt. Oh, okay, addiction is a disease, and it's
Right.
it's got all kinds of treatments and things, and that made it a little bit more. I mean, it made it a lot more palatable to us.
And I remember, Kim, when we were up at Karen, particularly family weekend, maybe, where my husband and I and the boys were up there, his brothers were up there with us, and having those honest conversations around the description, I am an addict. I think it actually has value. It has obvious potency, but it has such a breadth of truth that, okay, all right, we see where this is and we see where we are and we're in this together. So as much as I condemn the word, because I think it's loaded with shame, maybe that's partly why we did this, to say, I can say my son is an addict and I'm not ashamed,
I know nobody wants to wish this disease, this disorder on anyone. However, if you are able to access treatment and sustain recovery, my God, the gifts are just endless. One of you mentioned siblings. I think that I would love to, I know you talked about your brothers in the book, Harry, and obviously Mad, you did as well. So can you talk a little bit about, Harry, for you especially, what your relationships were like? I think that siblings, I gotta say, my little spiel here, I think siblings really do fall under the radar. When we are so worried about our child with a substance use disorder, we are so hyper-focused. We often also do a lot of defending of that person to the siblings, which they don't always appreciate because they've been perhaps marginalized and set aside a bit. And I don't know if that was the case with you. I have a daughter who was very engaged in our son's recovery process. So she actually doesn't hold a lot of resentment, but I hear that, and I think it's very understandable. So I just wondered here if you could talk about your relationship with your brothers and how it's evolved through all of this.
For sure. So my brother, I'm the middle of three boys, and I like to look at it as sort of perfect middle child syndrome. I'm the only one who had this struggle. My older brother seemed to never get in trouble at all. My grandmom from when he was born always called him Pat the Perfect, and he did a pretty good job of living up to that. So in terms of my relationship with my older brother throughout this time, it was really, I just tried to distance myself from him as much as I could because I didn't want to let him down. And I also didn't want to be viewed in the same set of expectations that he was, because I felt like I couldn't live up to that. So I set out on a wildly different path, from everything in terms of going to a different high school and just being completely in different circles so that we never crossed paths. And it was really just to, one, avoid those expectations, and two, I didn't want him to see it because I knew he wouldn't approve. And with my younger brother, it was similar in terms of trying to distance myself, but for different reasons. With my younger brother, as he was getting into high school, I was recognizing something wasn't, I didn't realize how bad it was, but I knew something wasn't quite right. And I didn't want him to follow in my footsteps. Because way before I saw how significant the problem was, I just didn't want that for him. So I really tried to distance myself. And you talked about it. I mean, I couldn't see it in the time, but for years of my mom and I battling, I'm certain they felt marginalized, because they were not the center of attention as often as I was, because there was always a crisis surrounding something that I did or something that happened around me that everyone was trying to figure out. But I'll say in terms of today, and really from the moment that we identified what this was and I went into treatment, they came to visit. They were part of the family program at Karen. They were involved in the treatment. I think in a lot of ways they didn't know what to do, as none of us do, but they wanted to help and they wanted to be supportive. And 8.5 years later, the two people who I felt like I was just so different from are, I can just see how close we are and how similar we are. So our relationship today is pretty remarkable from where it was 8.5, 9 years ago.
I remember, Kim, you and I think even spoke about this in that endless coffee that we had, that I really worried that it was the struggle and the turmoil and the searching was all consuming of me. And I was also trying to work at the time. I was also trying to break into politics and public service. And I remember the guilt of a mother saying, I'm spending so much time focusing on what is going on over here, that I felt, particularly Alex, the younger, I thought he might feel pretty doggone cheated, that there's a whole lot of white hot light on one person in this family and not so much being spread around here. But blessedly, for whatever reason, I think they were all sort of shell shocked. They hated the fighting. They recognized something was wrong. They didn't know what it was either. But the chance for them to come up to the Karen program and just to listen, to be a part of it. You said something like you wouldn't wish this on anybody. And I remember we were writing this book and I read Harry's part where he said he would not wish it away. Now, any parent on this call might wish this away. I certainly would have wished it away. I wouldn't want this to visit any family. But there's wisdom in what Harry said, which is he's grown so much as a result of it. And that's the bond of our family, from the days of when it was shattered, the trust was shattered, to today. We're stronger for it, as cliche as that might sound. Hard on a family.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of family, Kara, I think you should ask your question, which is a really good one. And then we'll get to some of the questions that have asked by our participants. Go ahead, Kara.
Absolutely. So I wanted to point out that Harry and Madeleine have also written You Are Always Loved, a story of hope, and it's a children's book. And my question is, in putting out Under Our Roof, why also a children's book, and what conversations do you hope that can foster between parents and their children, or anyone and children?
Harry, I'm tossing it to you first.
Sure. So, a big part of my story, my experience was, when I went into treatment, I had a 1-year-old daughter, and she was there through it all, young enough to where, fortunately she won't remember it. But it was an experience that we shared together. And, about 6 years into my recovery, I started working for Karen Treatment Center. So I left a different industry, and now, all of a sudden my work is involved in recovery, my life, my friends, everything is sort of surrounded by this. And my daughter's now, today she's 9. So she, with all of that, and sort of having a book coming out and recognizing that I'm comfortable and willing to share this with the world, but I don't know how to talk about it with my own daughter. And that was something that I think was what really excited us about the idea of doing the project to write a children's book. We were approached by the publisher to do it, and we just jumped on it because that was my thinking. If we can start talking about this and normalizing it, and saying it's okay, that this is who your dad is, and this is what we've been through without the scary or stigmatized language. It's a story with bunnies, and instead of addiction, it talks about a storm. So that was really what I hoped was, not just for my daughter, but for other children who might have a parent who's currently struggling and isn't present, that they can understand that they are loved, even if that person can't necessarily show it in the way that they might expect. And just allow parents and caregivers to open the door to have a conversation, about some difficult emotions. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is the emotional side of, it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be scared, but know that you're always loved, and that it's not your fault, right? It's this storm that's going on around you, but you didn't start it, and you can't control it, and you can't fix it, and hold on to whoever you have until it passes. So that's, selfishly, my daughter played a huge part in why I wanted to do it. And I know my mom has, another perspective as my mom. So I'll let her share on that.
Well, Kara, thanks for the question. I came at it from two angles, because if you knew Harry as a kid, he was a daredevil. He was a skateboarder. He was catching snakes. He was just, everything was kind of oversized for Harry. So when I read this book, when I read his writings about his own childhood, and he talked about his fears and crying himself to sleep at night, I can't tell you how piercing that is. He disguised it amazingly. We thought he was just this very small kid with this over enthusiastic fearlessness about him. So when the children's editor came to us and suggested it, I thought of it from sort of two perspectives. From his daughter's perspective, which is to say, if you see something in your family that's going on, and maybe somebody has to leave for some period of time, or somebody's struggling for some period of time, we think, children think it's all about them. That is their world. So if you're 5 or 6 or whatever, it must have something to do with me. So it was to say, this is not about you. You have a centeredness. You're always loved. But it was also in part to the little boy who was Harry, who was afraid. And we're all afraid.
Thank you so much. That's so important, and such a great resource for parents and caregivers out there. So thank you.
And the illustrator and the writer are such beautiful people. So
Nice.
really
Great.
beautiful.
Great. Wonderful. We need that. We really need that. So Harry, here's a question for you. You may have seen this in the Q&A. How has the recovery process impacted your ability to tell your story? And how has writing your book impacted your recovery process?
So first of all, I think that was from Adam. So
Yes,
thanks, Adam, for being here, for asking the question. It's funny, in hindsight, I remember that I think the first time my parents came to visit me in treatment, I was going through a list of trying to figure out who they told, and I remember they told me that they told my grandparents, and I was so concerned about that because I was so afraid to let anyone know what was happening. And really through the recovery process, and through, for me, a big part it's been, 12-step recovery, and watching other people tell their stories and share their stories in a vulnerable and honest way gave me the ability to start to process it and share it in those smaller groups first. And through that process of healing in my own recovery, I did come to recognize that this wasn't this horrible thing that needed to be, shielded in shame and stigma, but an opportunity that really turned me into who I am now, and going through that and coming out on the other side, I started to see the hope that I had seen in other people first, and it was happening for me. And I wanted to share that because when I was struggling, there's a huge community of people in recovery, but I just remember when I was 22 and I went into treatment, I couldn't identify anyone my age or, like me that was in recovery. And I think that, in terms of wanting to put the story out there, just to share, they're everywhere. Because once I got involved in recovery, I found that they were always all around me, just sort of hiding in plain sight. And, I just wanted to continue to spread that, right? That just to remind people that this is so common. And recovery can look a whole lot of different ways. You don't have to do what I did. There's so many different pathways to recovery. And I think it's so important to, whenever we do this, I just like to mention that, this isn't how to, this is just what we went through. So whatever your pathway is, I'm proud of you and just keep going for it. And to the second part of that question, sort of what is it, writing the book, what has it done? I mean, internally in our family, my mom and I, the trust that we had, the relationship that we had built before writing the book was incredibly strong. But processing this with my mom, and, even though it's just my mom and I who wrote it, my dad, my brothers, everybody was reading, my wife, Juliet, we were all reading it and living this story for, the 18 months that we wrote and rewrote, and we just as a unit became so much closer. And I think the trust that we've gained is just remarkable.
And today is Juliet's birthday.
It is.
And Kim, I have to tell you, in addition, the writing of the book, it's very much, a love story, mother-son love story, but I always want to mention it took the whole family. It's not just Harry and me in this thing alone. And Kim, I don't know if I told you this, but we had written it, and I think the editor came back to us at least 8-9 times. So by the time the book was finished, I wasn't even sure what had made the book. It became a bit of a blur. But somewhere right toward the end of our finishing the manuscript, PJ, my husband, his dad, said, by the way, I've written a chapter. And it's a good chapter. And we submitted it to the editor for consideration. I thought that could be a cool afterword. The chapter was entitled, I Was There Too. And so it's a really good chapter. In all earnestness, we handed it to the editor and said, maybe this could be an afterword. It might be helpful, somebody else's perspective who was living this alongside us. And the editor said, no thanks. So we're happy to share that chapter with anybody who would like it. The editor doesn't mind that we do that, but it was funny. It was very much a family event as we wrote and rewrote, and I tested my memory and was this the date, and that kind of thing.
Wow. We have a blog section on our website that is very much frequented by parents. So if you would like to have me post that on our blog, then I'd be happy to do that for BJ.
We'll send it along.
Awesome. That will be great. Stay tuned, folks. You're going to hear from Dad. Great. Well, Harry, there's a quick question. For each of you, I guess, when was the confrontation started? So I guess we're asking, how old was Harry when it was becoming obvious that there was some substance use going on?
So I guess from my perspective, the first time anything was identified was, a handful of my friends were arrested for underage drinking, and I was with them. I got away, but I guess I was 14 then. So that was sort of the first moment where there was like, okay, this is happening. And I would say probably about a year or two after that is when it started, to consistently become something that we were confrontational about, maybe when I was 15 or 16, sophomore, junior year in high school, when things really started to slip from there.
His friends changed, his affect changed. He had been so enthusiastic in going into high school, and then all kinds of things changed. His grades began to slip, particularly toward the end of high school. His affect, his look, and you know, sometimes one friend came up and said, "I wish I had said something to you." You know, when you're living with a person whose affect is changing incrementally day by day, you don't fully see it. And yet somebody who hadn't seen Harry in maybe a month or two, 3 months, would say, "Oh my gosh," but they didn't say it. So it was the end of high school when the real battles became constant in our lives, and then the beginning of college. So those 4 years were particularly tough, and until we got to the point of discovering what was wrong, the stolen money, and confronting him,
Right.
which was October 30th of 2012.
Wow. Thank you. And actually, perfect setup for the next question. Great book, by the way, Harry. And can you talk about the very beginning days, at the beginning of your high school days, how the insidious slide occurred? Could there have been, and everybody always wants to know this, right? They want to know, what's the secret sauce for what could have been done differently? Could there have been something that early on, school, friends, et cetera, would have changed your route or the story?
So in terms of just, you know, the insidious way that it started, you know, it started out, I think, like it starts for most kids in high school, and not every one of those kids winds up with a substance use disorder. You know, for me, we started drinking, I guess, like 13, 14 years old, and it was something that seemed normal, you know, to be a high school kid drinking in the woods. And you know, I recognized quickly that I loved the feeling. You know, I loved that it sort of took away all my anxiety and fear. And I'll say, you know, in terms of how naive I was, you know, I had been through the DARE program, but I couldn't see myself. I could not see a path from that moment to where I ended up addicted to opiates, and just my life in complete disarray just a few years later. But that's how it is insidious, because it just slowly moved from that to, you know, for me, marijuana, and then cocaine, and then pills. And, you know, each one of those things was sort of a calculated step that I justified along the way. And it wasn't this giant leap to becoming an addict, you know, and I think it's just important to say that. So I haven't found, you know, in writing the book or in recovery, you know, anything that would have stopped this from happening for me. I think something that I do recognize, and, you know, I think my parents did a wonderful job. I don't think there's anything they would have or could have or should have done differently, because nobody knew, right? But I think it's important to have conversations that sort of identify this as what it is, you know, and just to say maybe out loud to a kid, you know, if you are ever struggling, just to break down the stigma part of it, you know, because I remember my dad used to tell me, hey, if you ever need a ride, if somebody's drinking, you don't want to get in the car, whatever it is, just call me, I'll pick you up, no questions asked. And that was something that I never took him up on, but I felt good about. But when it came to the end, I just felt so much shame because I didn't understand what I was going through. So I think just to continue to have these conversations and just see it for what it is, you know, that it's a disease and some people need help and need treatment, and that doesn't mean you're a bad person. Then maybe I might have reached out for help sooner. I don't know. You know, I think my parents did everything they could have at the time. But hindsight's always, you know, 2020. So I just think there's no clear answer, but I just think what, you know, Kim, what you're doing, you know, would be part of the conversation to just talk about it and normalize it. You know, when somebody needs help, maybe they'll be just a little bit more comfortable to ask.
And maybe with families that do have experience or predisposition, having that kind of honest conversation earlier. Looking at your promotions at the beginning of this conversation about the mock teen bedroom. You know, I remember one time storming into his room. I was so mad and I was just going to search that room and find out what was going on. And I wish I had understood what I was actually looking for. I didn't know what to look for. I was ignorant of so many things. But that is a question we get all the time. And I wish I had an answer, because I was both knowing there was something seriously wrong with Harry and also probably hoping it wasn't what I was thinking. It's sort of a combination.
Yeah. Yeah. And the not knowing what to look for, but also not knowing what to do once you find it. You know,
Right.
That's really why we've partnered that bedroom with Parenting on Your Feet. You know, there's a lot of work to do once you recognize that something's going on. And that's why we actually have programs for parents whose kids are in K through 5 even, you know, so we talk about just having a really open dialogue in our home, and no judgment about celebrities that we hear about, no, you know, trash talking the neighbors or anything like that, just so that our kids know that you can always talk to us about this. We're not going to judge you. We're not going to believe that you're deficient in any way, you know, there's a lot of love and support out there. So there's a question about most people with an addiction don't seem to come back home. They're asking, Harry, if you've been able to do this. I think we've addressed kind of what that was like for you, you know, when you did go back home initially. How did this work? And they also ask if you're involved with a 12-step program. But if you could talk more about like kind of when it felt okay, maybe to go back home too, you know, when it was more comfortable, when did that line get crossed? Or
Yeah. So, you know, for me, I was away for about 4 months. So that first passage that we read was about halfway through my treatment, and I wasn't ready at that point. But about 4 months in, I was, you know, again, I'm 22. I have a 1-year-old baby. You know, I had work to go back to. And I felt like, okay, this is time. I'm stabilized. I need to, you know, give this everything I have. And, you know, I had a lot of conversations with the counselors where I was and the support staff and my family of trying to figure out what it would look like, what boundaries would look like. And it was difficult. You know, there's an expression we always say, it's, you know, trust is gained in drops and lost in buckets. And, you know, coming home, it was really a starting over point, you know, and it felt like those expectations were still there. You know, but I was at least 4 months in, a little bit better equipped to handle them, and to go slowly in terms of rebuilding that trust, and realize that I can't rebuild it in a day. You know, so for us, I know some people for different circumstances end up home sooner, and some have the opportunity to be away much longer. But for us, it was about 4 months in that I went back home.
Thank you. Someone has asked if you have had any relapses, and knock on wood, so far you have not, correct? One treatment program?
Yep.
It is possible. It's unusual, but it is possible. Thank you. And someone asked if you could repeat, it was actually what Father Bill had said. There was a Father Martin's Ashley, now known as Ashley. There's another father, and that's Father Bill, and he was a beloved member of Karen's staff. And we actually, one of these days soon, I hope I have been working for a while on a page on our website dedicated to Father Bill. He was a very, very dear friend of mine and our families. And they broke the mold with him, and I don't think we'll ever be able to replace him, but you had the great fortune of knowing him, Harry. Can you repeat what that was that Father Bill said about being a good person?
Yeah, he was he was a staple at Karen, who sadly passed away a couple years ago. And, you know, I mentioned before, there's there's a lot of patience there, but I remember, at one point he singled me out. I was walking out of the cafeteria or in, I don't remember in or out, but, he asked me how I was. And in the conversation, he said, "You're not a bad person trying to be good. You're a sick person trying to get well." And I think that, it's just that little shift of what we're dealing with, and just, it goes to some of the other questions that I see in here of just, it is a disease, and we're sick, but we can get better. It's not that we're bad people. And I think so much of the stigma and so much of the problems that we have with this issue is that through a lack of understanding or ignorance, people view a lot of the behaviors as these are just bad people. And we need to identify that they're just symptoms of a disease. So.
Thank you. We have a question for you again, Harry. Thank you for your work that you do in the jails. My daughter found the beginning of her recovery while she was incarcerated through the AA group that came in 3 times a week. How can we get the legal system to provide AA or NA on a consistent basis for people in jail? And Madeleine, any thoughts on that as well?
I don't know how to get, more consistent. I know with COVID, it's been even more challenging just with, getting people inside anywhere. But I'll say for me, that was an incredibly rewarding experience when I was able to do that. I'm not currently, I hope to be able to volunteer more in the jails, at some point soon. Because for me, as someone who hadn't been arrested, but had every reason to be, in there on the other side, I think it's just so important to see that the humanity in, so many people who are struggling with the same thing I was are so much less fortunate and find themselves in that situation because we deal with this too often with the criminal justice system. And I think, I would love to see that expanded. I don't know how to do it. The whole, it's a whole can of worms with the criminal justice system and the jails. But I just hope that as we continue to talk about the issue and continue to identify it as a disease and as a treatable disease, and that, meetings for many, many people, it's not the only way. Again, it's one pathway to recovery, but for many people, it's a successful pathway. And for those who are in that situation and find themselves incarcerated, they say it should be like rehabilitation. You should be offering them every level of support possible, and it costs nothing. People are willing to be of service and do it. So we've got to continue to expand that, but I am not an expert in the criminal justice system.
And we're keenly aware that too many people have their substance use disorder criminalized and wind up in the criminal justice system. We're keenly aware that, but for a few things, perhaps skin color, perhaps address on his license, socioeconomic status. He also happened to look really young as a young person. He looked years younger than even his young self. But where we lived and the color of his skin, Harry doesn't have a record. And he admits that we know an awful lot of people that do wind up in the criminal justice system. So number one, we have to, I'm working on it. I'm passionate about it. I have been since I was a state representative and now in Congress, to say we have to decriminalize this. We don't deal with somebody who is struggling with a disease by putting them behind bars and expect a good outcome. Not to mention the derailing that it does for that person, for their family, for their economic circumstances, for life. You got a, federal crime on your record. You are derailed for life, unfairly. White privilege plays into it. Poverty plays into it. So number one, criminal justice reform. But for those who are within the system, we have to get a uniform set of best practices. You can be in one carceral system and they do offer meetings and recovery and hope, and others where there's nothing. And Kim, you were saying, were we surprised by some of the outreach we got after the book release? We had an email from a daughter whose mother is incarcerated in a Western state, and she's addicted and she's getting no help. There's no treatment for her. And this has been a cycle. She goes into jail, no treatment. She'll eventually get her way out and will go back. We have to do better in this country. Number one, not criminalizing substance use disorder. And number two, when it's recognized, offer help, meetings, recovery, a consistent set of best practices.
Hear, hear. And when people are released, they are incredibly vulnerable to overdose because their tolerance has dropped. And if they pick up their substance at the same potency that they were using previously, they're very, very vulnerable to dying from an overdose. So it's such a missed opportunity. It's not an opportunity, but they're there. They're in a captive environment. Obviously, what if they're going to be there? Why not? It's just so infuriating. Thank you for saying that. I'll get off my soapbox. Do either of you envision a day when the disease of addiction will be recognized by the general community as a disease, when treatment will be provided instead of incarceration in response to a DUI or other drug-related offenses, when someone who needs supervision and support will be assigned to an addiction specialist rather than a parole officer whose only response to relapse is incarceration rather than treatment option? Your willingness to share your experience is much appreciated. Very well stated. Any further thoughts on that?
Maybe out of crisis, this will happen. And the more that families like these tell their story, that's why we said if it could happen under our roof, and we think we're pretty ordinary suburban family, it can happen under anybody's roof. And sadly, this pandemic, you're seeing the numbers. The numbers are horrifying. The tragic loss of life from overdose. I think one measure with maybe 3/4 of that 12-month period is 81,000 people have died of overdose. I think the newer number is going to be, we will maybe have more than 100,000 people die in 12 months of a pandemic from overdose. There's almost, I don't know too many families or neighborhoods that aren't affected by it. So we actually have a caucus in Congress around addiction and opioid substance use disorder, headed by Congressman Trone, who had a family member die. And so I guess it's going to take more and more of that. Families affected, crazy loss of life, because you all know this as well as anybody, that a single loss, of course, is devastating to that person, to that soul, that person. But what it has done to their family, and then what it does to the greater community, it's incalculable. So you times that by 100,000 in a year, that's a couple hundred people. I think it's something like 275 people a day. I call it a jetliner a day. Remember when 2 Boeings crashed within weeks of each other and hundreds of people died? The industry and the world grounded the damn plane because they said, we have to figure out what's going on that's taking so many lives. Well, that jetliner is going down every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 365 days a year. And until we stamp out the ignorance, and we all suffer from it in some ways, of this is a disease, and we tamp down on the shame and the stigma, then maybe we will get to those days of saying, here, let's offer recovery. Let's offer you a hand instead of judging you and shunning you.
Glad you're on our side, Matt. Thank you for doing your work. I really appreciate it. And what advice would you give to parents who might believe that they can foster their child's recovery, such as drug testing, extra rules, checking to see if they're going to meetings, and so on? You did a little bit of the drug testing.
I'm the wrong guy to ask. Harry, do you have any advice? Because I seem to have failed. But I kept at it. I'm tenacious.
I think advice that I would give, for parents, because it's the same thing on a parallel path of, what I found, is through groups of people like, what Kim and Judy and everyone here is doing, find other families that you can bounce ideas off of who have been through this, find that support system, because it's such a dynamic issue. Everyone's situation is a little bit different. And I think it's important to recognize that without allowing that to make you think you're totally unique. Because I know for me, I felt unique, and I thought that meant I got to do things entirely my own way. Where I think there's important boundaries, and there's different opportunities to help and be supportive without being overbearing or micromanaging. And it's very hard, I'll just say, to take the emotion out, when it's a parent and you love someone so deeply and you are doing it because you want them to be healthy. You can't sort of do that on your own. You've got to find people that you can bounce ideas off of and recognize. There's a cliche that I love. It's just, you can't spot self-deception by yourself, so if you, for me in my own recovery, I got to bounce ideas off other people, because I can convince myself of some pretty wild ideas. And I think as a parent, it can be easy to justify, they're in my house, they have to follow my rules. These are, what I'm asking of them. And that can be okay. But having a network, whether it's support groups, a single friend, a 12-step, Al-Anon, Nor-Anon, whatever it is, you got to get somebody in your corner.
And I think to be less flip in my answer, I remember when Harry came home and he was starting in recovery, how worried I was. And I felt like we were all walking on eggshells. And I wanted to help him, but didn't know how. And so would sort of gently ask him questions, how'd the meeting go? One time early on saying, could I go with you to a meeting? He's like, no, thanks, Mom. No. So I was trying to figure it out, or how are you doing in your step work? Or have you identified your sponsor? I would just ask little questions, but I really recognized that there really wasn't a place for me there other than just to say, I'm here. And if you need to talk to me or Daddy, if there's anything we can do, but there's a strange feeling that you can't do this. You can't hold their hand as they do it. You can be there, certainly showing your support, but you can't do it with them. It's a journey, and I think for parents, one of my thoughts is trust your gut in terms of what you're worrying about. Trust your gut in how you're standing next to your child, your son or daughter, as they begin recovery or continue in recovery, and try to get rid of the guilt along the way too.
Right. And stay in your lane. That's another one of the expressions that we have too. It's very important. Matt, can you talk about how you and PJ, did you have a backup plan for that intervention that you had with Harry if he had refused to go to treatment? And Harry, rather than pushing back, what in that moment allowed you to surrender and be willing to go to treatment?
My backup plan was to hire a professional. And you and I had discussed that months earlier. That was my backup plan, but we had hit such a crisis moment when I discovered the theft. And it was all hitting at one time. I just thought, you know what, I'm going to put the evidence right out on the table, show him what we discovered. And so see if he would go. And I had pre-called Karen. We had also pre-called and identified other places that might be a possibility. But my thought was if we didn't break through in that meeting, and I really didn't expect to break through in that single sit down, except maybe the years of battling in advance of it primed that. But I thought we would seek a professional.
And Harry, did you want to talk about what it was in that moment that made you ready to say yes?
for sure. I mean, in that moment, it was not, in my eyes, I mean, for my mom and dad, it was this huge moment of they caught me stealing. But there had been other times where money was missing or there were confrontations. For me, it was really, that was a big moment, but it was just recognizing the years of what I had been doing. And most specifically, a huge component of my experience was that happened just 4 days after my daughter turned 1. And I remember when I found out my girlfriend at the time was pregnant, and I was completely caught up in my addiction, that I believed that becoming a dad was going to save me, that I was going to be this father that I want to be. And I quickly recognized that hadn't happened. Right. And for an entire year and those 4 days after she was born, I continued to use, and every day I hated myself a little bit more. So for me, it was an opportunity where I could say yes to help. But more than anything, it was just recognizing that I was so desperate to get out of the way that I was feeling that I was willing to try something different. My mom had mentioned to me, sort of, this is, a little other piece of context, on Friday. So I was confronted on a Tuesday. The Friday before, my mom just offhanded mentioned that there was something wrong with the bank account. So I knew that meant I was caught. And I was generally very good at spinning a story quickly. And I had from Friday until Tuesday to try to come up with something, anything that would get me out of it or buy me more time. And I couldn't come up with anything. It was easier in that moment to just almost give up, and just not say anything than to try to spin some new elaborate lie, because I was just too tired.
Kim, you knew my father-in-law, Bill Cunnane. We're a big Irish Catholic family. And of course, my father-in-law, Bill, had the gift of gab. You remember he would walk down Roberts Avenue. And Harry got Bill's gift of gab and could weave a story. And so when we confronted him, I thought, here we go. He's gonna try something. And he had nothing to say. And we said, are you willing to get help? He said a single word, yes. It's such a change from the years of spinning fanciful, crazy, sometimes believable, but many times not, stories. No more stories at that moment.
There are so many good questions. I'm having a really tough time narrowing them down. I'm going to put these 3 together because we're almost at 8:30. A couple of people are asking about coverage for treatment. So 28 days, that's detox. It's not enough. It's certainly not enough for changing a lifetime of patterns. So can you guys address, what works best in your view, how we can possibly hope for change, advocate for change in coverage and so on? And can I just say, for anybody, I know a lot of people joining us tonight are connected to support groups. Many of these questions come up every single night of the week in these parent support group meetings. Please connect. There's some great questions, and I know that we talk about them. These are our themes of the week so often. So just another shout out for that connection. I'm in a group every Wednesday night, as some of the other folks are. It's based out of Hatboro, but it's on Zoom right now. But anyway, please join those. But I'll stop and ask you guys to address that question.
Well, that's a whole nother really important set of considerations. And what are we doing in our healthcare system? Where, right now, some people who are identified as needing treatment will go in and they might be offered 15 days or something even shorter, or 28. And I'm not a physician, I'm not a researcher, but I learned early on that this is a disease of the brain that takes a lot longer, especially when it is somebody who is a young male, the younger brain. And so I knew going in that this was going to be, at the time, this is 8.5 years ago now, that this was likely going to be expensive. We have to get where our healthcare covers mental health and substance use disorder like it covers our physical health. I've been very proud of one insurer, Independence Blue Cross, who covers treatment. And in the case of relapse, we know the inhumanity of saying, oh, you relapsed? Well, we tried it. We tried to offer you help once. And we know all the cliche examples where you would not say that to somebody who had a relapse or a reoccurrence of cancer. So we have to go a long way to get full coverage, longer term coverage, affordably insured or through public health, so that everybody has that opportunity for long-term health. We know that directly connected to Harry's success in the work of recovery was that he had a longer term start. I believed the day he went in that if he came out too fast, he would never, he kept fighting. I've got a daughter at home. I got to get back. I got to get home. The first few weeks of calls, you can imagine, Kim, how those go. And I just kept saying, the only chance you have to be a father is if you get long-term care and you buy into long-term recovery and treatment. But we've got a long way to go in our healthcare system. But we keep fighting. We're fighting. We have legislation we're fighting for. Some insurance companies are coming around. Our public system needs to be able to cover longer and more sustained treatment.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to really bringing this into the conversation of mainstream medicine and treating it as the chronic brain disease that it is. I mean, historically, so much of the treatment that people have had access to is episodic. So it's, you're struggling, you get a treatment, whether that's, if you're even fortunate enough to get the 28 days, which we know isn't enough, but is more than a lot of times gets covered. And then you're sort of left on your own. We have in place, there's a continuum of care that allows people to continue to step down if the insurance companies can give access to it and treat it that way, like it is a chronic disease and like it needs continued long-term follow-up treatment. I know at Karen, we've worked closely at Independence Blue Cross, did a study recently to show that long-term treatment works, and having the right level of therapists and just the full sort of support, and treating it not just in a biological sense, but looking at all of the co-occurring disorders and treating the whole person. And when we do that, the success rate is incredibly high. And I think as we see that and that can become more apparent, it'll be easier for others to hopefully be willing to treat it that way, because it makes sense, not just for the person because it's the right thing to do and it's the right way to treat it, but the overall cost on the community emotionally and financially is reduced if we can address this properly from the start, and not constantly be playing catch up. So I think it really is a matter of just continuing the conversation to push to say that this is a chronic brain disease. It needs to be treated that way. And the episodic treatment that we've gotten accustomed to is not appropriate and is why we're seeing such a high relapse rate.
Kim, I remember it was maybe back in, what year was it? I was a state representative. So maybe I'm going to say 2013, 14, somewhere in there, the debate over the standing order for Narcan. And I remember the arguments on the floor of the Pennsylvania House at that time. I raised them to say, we've made some good strides. I remember literally a colleague standing on the floor of the House saying, why would we allow them to have Narcan? We're just enabling them. I mean, how many times are we to save somebody? Literally, that was an argument made by an elected official. And of course, we were successful in that. I was very proud that we were successful in saying of, 20 times 20, however many times it takes. Are you kidding me? So in some ways, some of the ignorance we are stepping our way out of. We have made some progress, but there's so much more we can do.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sorry. We've already defibrillated you once.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very similar to me. That just, yeah. It's astounding.
Right.
But yes, thankfully, we've at least made some progress in that regard. But I want to respect your time. We're past our 8:30 mark. You guys are just tremendous. Thank you. It's just and you're both a gift in my life, and I'm so grateful to know you. And thank you to everyone who came. I'm so sorry we couldn't get to all the questions. You had wonderful questions, but please reach out. And our contact information is on the website. So I'm happy to try to follow up with anyone who could use some help.
And if you want to forward more questions to us, Kim, that we'd be happy to follow up too.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks, Harry and Matt. Thanks, Judy and Kara. And thanks, everybody, for being here.
Thank you all.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely.